Now may I call upon Dinesh?
Please give me 10 minutes. It was not clarified. I thought I have 15 minutes, but I'll try to do it justice within 10 minutes because since morning you're talking about IPR, SAP, and I have a few slides which I can quickly run through it. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a technology man. I'm a standardization expert in India, European standardization expert in India, heading a project. Basically, I represent European standards organizations in India, which means I work with Indian stakeholders to share best practices around the evolving technologies. And my project works on ICT, information communication technology as a sector. But apart from that, I work on automotive, electrical equipment, and smart cities. Beyond that, any request if comes from India, I do handle it. Yes, we're talking about 5G as a technology. I could have prepared a presentation to give you a status update where we stand on a 5G, but looking at the theme of the session, I will limit my update to policies where we stand because these are evolving technologies. And with that, let me begin with the presentation. So, next slide, please. I will try to cover quickly European standardization system and how it is globally harmonized, and especially when you look at from an ICT perspective, considering the interoperability as a fact, you cannot have a local or a regional standard. It has to be a global standard. And that's the reason the standards development organization from around the world, they work together. So I'll give you an update with that, some updates, one slides on each of these topics, evolving technologies. Okay, perfect. All right. So in Europe, there are 3 standards organizations, CEN, CENELEC. From an Indian perspective, we have a Bureau of Indian Standard, who is a counterpart of CEN and CENELEC in India. And if you compare it from an ISO, I'll show it in the next slide. And ITSI is European Telecommunications Standards Institute, which work on telecommunication. Now telecommunication is no more telecommunication, it's ICT, information communication technologies. And you heard the reason when the non-ICT sectors, when you talk about these vertical industries, vertical applications, it's becoming huge, and 5G is going to take care of that. But there is a legislation which supports that these are the legal organizations called 1025, which was released in 2012, that these are the government-recognized standards organization. If you see how it is harmonized with the global organizations, CEN, CENELEC have an agreement with ISO and IEC. And more from a telecommunication or ICT perspective with ITSI, they work with 3GPP. Now, 3GPP is the one which develops specifications when we talk about 2G, 3G, 4G, or 5G now. And 3GPP is a partnership project, third generation's partnership project, which basically brings standard development organization from around the world to come together, work together, and develop specifications or standards. We have in India now its equivalent, we call it TSDSI, Telecom Standard Development Society India. They are also the organizational partner. Similar to that, because IoT is a very complex world, and it's a very fragmented society because it's huge, the standardization of everything cannot be done at one place. So similar project was established called One M2M Partnership Project, which was mainly focusing on the service layer. You know, when you know the layer from a network perspective, you have a network, you have a service layer, and then you have an application. So this One M2M Partnership Project decided to address the service layer, and they call it common service layer. That's what they're focusing on. And then they have an agreement between them. A little bit in Europe, you know, it's a 28 member state still. We'll see, one goes out. When CEN, CENELEC or European Commission releases any EN, which is European norm as a standard, the entire Europe adopts and implement that standard. While the target is to have one global solutions, because when you have a one global solution, the market is open for anybody. It's a fair business. There's no technical barriers. So you can see how big becomes the market when you have a one global harmonized standards. And that's what the target is. Even European Standards Organization, they always try to have a global standard. But in ICT, it's more or less, as I said, it's always a global standard. This is how the market has evolved. I need not to tell you everything, but if you see it, we talk about eco-design, renewable energies, smart grids, smart meters. You put anything on top of it smart, which means nothing but ICT. You're putting an ICT on top of this. These were non-ICT sector. They were legacy sectors. Just by putting a word called smart, you're putting an ICT layer on top of it. You can imagine how complex system is evolving, how complex the patenting will happen, how complex the IPR will evolve. On top of it, we have started talking about open systems. More and more people are talking about open system, open source system. You can imagine how complex the system will become. But then, if you see it from an evolution perspective, open source will be there, quantum engineering will be there after 2020, and Internet of everything, everything. You talk about machine to machine, Internet of things, but Internet of everything will become a next phase. I need not to talk about it, you know it. If you talk about innovation, a measure of innovation is the number of patents registered. Now, if you talk about this is all a simple case, I think since morning you're talking about it, how this FRAND mechanism works, who develops, who issues the license, and then there is a FRAND mechanism. Being an ESOs, European standards organizations, everybody has an IPR policy. Now this IPR policy is globally harmonized. Whoever is a member, everybody follows the FRAND mechanism. Now standards get interlinked with patents once they become essential or a part of standard. Now what the standards organization, especially ITSI does it, they have a database. When the members sign an agreement, there is a voluntary disclosure of their patents. And once it becomes essential to implement a standard, it becomes standard essential patent. So they both are linked. This is, we all know it, tensions will always be there. It's not the end of the world. It becomes more and more complex. Who enjoys is the lawyer. And the lawyers have different terminologies, patent ambush, shock trolling, royalty stacking, and a patent holdup. But this fight will continue to remain there. It's a challenge for standardization in an innovative world, especially from a new technology perspective, as I said, because very complex world we are evolving. You heard about 5G. From a standardization point of view, release 15 is ready. Pilots are getting implemented. And I think 2020, you will see a big scale commercial rollout. But 5G had three elements in it, enhanced mobile broadband, ultra low latency, ULLC, and then massive machine-to-machine communications. This is how phased approach of standardization is taking place. eMMB is done, mobile broadband is done. But new generations will bring new challenges. As I said, patent policies are aligned globally. The standards organization, they ensure that they respect each other's policies. They're a guide. But essential patents will always involve euros or dollars. It's a lot of research. You heard the numbers, how much research money is put into it, and they have to capitalize on those research. So this will always have a linkages, and it's between two parties to decide on it. And standards organizations, what they ensure is the members have to respect FRAND, and they have to disclose the patents. So ITSI has a database which these members, they disclose it. Anybody who is implementing a standard, he can find out which standards are linked with standard essential patents. With that, let me give you 4 more slides. Just quick status update from a policy perspective when you talk about 5G, IoT, artificial intelligence, and the industrial evolution. This is first slides. On the left-hand side, it is Europe. On the right-hand side, it is India. In Europe, way back in 2013, the work around 5G was started. A public-private partnership was established. And there was a Horizon 2020 research project which funded many of activities around this 5G research. Phase 1 was future 5G network architecture. Second was moving towards demonstration and experimental of this vertical industries, as I said. And then third phase is connected and automotive mobility. This is how it is done. It's closed. These are hyperlinked. Presentation will be shared. You can have more information. Then this 5G action plan for Europe was launched in 2016. And in 2018, again, European 5G Observatory was launched to monitor the progress of this action plan. So there is an action plan, and they're monitoring it. This is what happened in 5G from a policy perspective. And I already told you about standardization. It's ready for commercial release 15, and then release 16 and 17 is done. 17 work is in progress. In India, we worked with the Indian side of it when they started talking about 5G. So 5G high-level forum was established on the similar line as 5G public-private partnership. And then second is, which I think he talked about it, one of fellow panelists, India has decided through its Ministry of Communications to carry out some test beds in India. And they have engaged with Indian Institute of Technologies to carry out these 5G test cases, which could be India's specific test cases. They will do a research on it, and if they think it need to be standardized, it will come out. So these are the IITs and Center for Excellence for Wireless Information Technology, Samir, Indian Institute of Science. These are the one who will continue working on it. Then TRAI also released a white paper on it, how to enable 5G in India. Then this latest is National Digital Communication Policy. Earlier it used to be National Telecom Policy, but Government of India realized it, that now it's a digital communication, so they renamed the department and now it's a digital communication policy, which also talks about implementation of IoT and M2M in India. If we talk about from an IoT perspective and M2M perspective, the digital single market strategy talked about this machine to machine. And then followed up of that was the digitizing European industry. And digitization cannot happen without the sensors, without the machine to machine or these IoT devices. So they did talk about it, and they published, European Commission published an Advancing the Internet of Things in Europe. Then they also set up Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation. And then when the world was fragmented, Alliance for IoT was also established, and they have produced various reports. In India, Ministry of Electronics and IT thinks like IoT is their domain, so they released IoT policy. Ministry of Communication released M2M roadmap. They have established Center of Excellence with an association. And then draft guideline was also released for M2M, because government thought existing telecom operator cannot take care of the entire M2M, so they decided to come out with some kind of registration policy, but it is put on hold because it's niche market, it's growing, so we suggested not to come out with a policy, let the evolution happen and let the implementation happens. If you see from an artificial intelligence point of view, a lot of activities, European AI Alliance, and then there was a communication in 2018, a lot of work happened with artificial intelligence for Europe, declaration on AI corporations, and the latest one is digitizing European program in IE, for which the funds have been allocated for 2.5 billion. There is one document which they have released called Ethics Guideline, because when you talk about artificial intelligence, ethics guidelines are the core. So that guideline have been released in Europe. In India, discussion paper was released, and they're talking about few sectors for AI, healthcare, agriculture, education, infrastructure, and transportation, which they'll focus on from an AI perspective in India. And now they want to come out with a national plan. The last slide, from a fourth industrial revolution point of view, which we also call it smart manufacturing. Again, it's sensorization or Internet of Things, but Factories of Future project was launched in in Europe. And in that, they decided to carry out certain activities. Again, I have mentioned because I've run out of time, so I'm not repeating them or reading them. But several European countries have launched, this is a European perspective, but then individual member states have also launched their program. Like Germany has Industry 4.0, similar program is in France, but then overall it's Factories of the Future. And then some information about Horizon 2020 research project, which are also around these Factories of the Future or Industry 4.0. In India, we have something from a heavy industries, Samarth Udyog Bharat 4.0, which has basically set up a lab in a couple of places to carry out this work. And then we have a draft industrial policy, which will be renewed now to take care of this artificial intelligence in India. And we also produced, as part of Bureau of Indian Standard, a pre-standardization report on smart manufacturing. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. Actually, we can have those slides on because I probably would have a few questions regarding those slides. We can have a longer discussion. So thank you very much, panelists, for your opening remarks, and I have a number of questions. If I may sort of start with Eric. Eric, we already are having, I don't know whether it's tense or perplexed, but it's a difficult present. Where we do not have answers for many questions. The tension is palpable. And now we are in the process of moving to the next phase. What are the business models, licensing models that you foresee, right? That possibly we can borrow from the current situation, day and age, which probably would work properly in the age of 5G, IoT, so on and so forth? And what are the complexities that you can sort of foresee in years to come in relation to 5G? So what are the business models that possibly will work, may not work, would work, to what extent it might work if we have a model as such?
Well, I think with regard to the I think with regard to the personal communications handset 5G handsets, the existing business models have worked, and I think they'll continue to be applied for handsets. The Avanci platform doesn't cover 5G, it only covers 2G, 3G, and 4G. I expect a similar type of patent pool will be created for 5G on the side of licensors, and I also expect that there will be a licensee pool created for IoT 5G, because a lot of these small and medium, this is what I see, I have a lot of small and medium-sized companies that I work for. The challenges that were laid out are real. They don't have the resources, they don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge, and I think that it makes sense, just from a matter of licensing efficiency, for a lot of licensees to get together and negotiate a pool license. That brings with it all kinds of difficulties and complexities. I don't think competition authorities normally look at licensors' pools. I don't think they've ever really looked at licensee pools. You have a monopoly and a monopsony, and I have no idea how that's going to play out. But I foresee that being a viable thing in the future.
I mean, if I may sort of ask you a follow-up question as to, I mean, what time did it take us to actually come up to the solution that, whatever solution that we have, and what time it might take us to actually reach to some sort of solution in the realms of 5G? Because it seems that we have a timeline. I mean, we were having a discussion yesterday as a part of the panel discussion that we have a deployment plan in 2020, so far as India is concerned. So what is the time scale? It seems like it's an extremely complex situation where there are multiple stakeholders and they discuss complex issues. So how do we reach to a consensus, and how long it might take us?
We don't. I entered the telecom industry in 1992 when I started working with Ericsson. And many of the same things that we're talking about today, we were talking about in 1992. And there was really never any consensus, never any agreement on it. But people make commercial agreements. I mean, the vast majority of SEP licensing is done amicably. We see disputes that pop up that get a lot of headlines, but it sort of hides the fact that most parties on a bilateral basis can come to some commercial agreement. And I expect the same thing is going to continue. We'll have these high-profile fights. We'll have officially no consensus on what FRAND means, and business will continue.
Okay, thank you. Manveen, you've talked about, a little bit about, I know you work extensively on IPR policies, and do you see any change in IPR policies as we move forward, to India's deployment plan? I know it's not always TSDSI, but do you see any change in IPR policies to have this smooth transition maybe?
See, the thing is that if we talk about SSO IPR policies, for the past, I think 7 to 8 years or so, there has been constantly, these voices out there, be it the courts, be it the competition agencies, be it, neutral forums where this thing has been talked about, that look, the problem with respect to the lack of clarity in FRAND and all the licensing disputes is rooted in the ambiguity that is inherent in the IPR policies. So rather than your coming to the courts of law or coming to the competition agency saying, well, there's an abuse of dominance here, or coming to the court of law and saying, well, please decide whether a particular rate is fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory or not. You might as well take a step back and let the SSOs offer some clarity on this aspect. I do not by any means on that note wish to suggest that there needs to be a precise value attached to FRAND, or say, okay, let's say 3.5% of the value of the 3.5% of the market value of a particular product. I do not mean to suggest that, but what I mean to say is some framework that is to be taken into consideration when you say whether whether a particular rate is FRAND or in the US context reasonable and non-discriminatory. Now, we know that only one particular SSO has gone ahead and actually implemented that thing in the recent past. If I go back again, 4 years, more than 4 years, 4.5 years. And we know that the follow-up has been mixed. We don't really know what exactly are the figures out there which probably can support whether it was a positive move or not. On that note, keeping in context all of those developments, I do not see the SSOs probably stepping in the near future and delving into the question of FRAND vis-a-vis 5G, because it hasn't happened with respect to that phase till 4G. Now, yes, 5G is around, and we can probably at this point leave out the developing countries and look more towards the developed jurisdictions, primarily the EU and the US. But I mean, again, it again goes back to the fact that, well, do you wish to actually jump into that, or do you wish to leave it to the stakeholders to decide amongst themselves what is going to be FRAND? Yes, definitely, from a personal perspective, I would want the SSOs to bring in more clarity to their IPR policies, but whether they do it or not is something that they have to balance vis-a-vis the interests of their stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, it all boils down to whether you have all the right people in terms of your adding up to your membership. Because if they're not happy with your IPR policy, they might just take a backseat, or they might reveal their technology somewhere else. So again, I mean, that's a call that SSOs would consciously have to take by revisiting this very question of whether IPR policy should offer any particular guidance on defining FRAND. That's
Sure.
If I could just ask you a follow-up question. Given that the ETSI IPR policy, which is the one I'm most familiar with, has been debated for 27 years, and FRAND has remained undefined for 27 years, why do you think that it might change in the future?
I repeat, I do not say that they will change, but what I'm probably, let's say, I wish that there was some sort of guidance on this particular aspect of fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, or let's say what are probably going to be the factors to be considered vis-a-vis different licensees when you are giving out a license, in terms of SEPs out there to help everybody involved in this thing. That might be the welcome change that everybody is looking for, because in a country like India, we already have a huge backlog of cases before the courts. You cannot simply say that, well, like, we have TSDSI. We say, well, we don't want to get into this thing of defining FRAND or in anywhere staying near FRAND. We'll stay away, like ETSI probably, right? One of the biggest SSOs in the world. And again, goes back to the domain of the courts to decide. The courts will be like, we already have 1 to probably, 26,000 or 27,000 cases per judge. That's the ratio in India. Add to it the fact that we now have to decide on FRAND, which is a vague area around the world, which is a vague concept around the world. So probably, I'm assuming we don't want that scenario, at least in India. But again, for Europe, it might be functioning fine, which it has been, maybe up until this point in time. But then again, it was in the round table in Geneva in 2012 when this thing was suggested that SSOs should bring in more clarity to their IPR policies. But then that's just one voice coming from one particular jurisdiction in the world that I'm hinting at.
If I make an add, why TSDSI is saying we cannot touch it? It's very simple. It's an ecosystem including IPR policy. Who sets up these standards? 3GPP. Now when 3GPP creates its organizational partner like SSOs, they have to respect that. And he's right. For 27 years, we have been debating about friend. We could update about open source system, the new inclusions, but they'll never get into these discussions. It is not the job of SSOs to talk about, I mean, they can only say respect it. You are my member, you sign this agreement, you have to acknowledge this agreement, which is friend, and you do a disclosure. They will only come into picture when somebody is not respecting an agreement. But I don't think so personally, any individual member will go away from this globally harmonized policy. If something will happen, it will happen to the 3G people, and then SSOs will say, yes, let's do it. This is a good change. I think you're referring about IEEE, that's a different case study. I mean, you know it, whether they are part of the good ecosystem or not. They have done it, but we all know what had happened after that, how much they have lost out of it. So in my personal opinion, it could be updated with the new evolving system like open source, new things. ITSE has an IPR policy group, I mean technical group. They keep on debating what should be done. But FRAND, I don't think so personally, whether it is 5G or 6G, it will stay there.
Dinesh,
in my opinion.
I have sort of have a follow-up question. You had actually put up 4 slides, very interesting slides about what's happening in Europe, you know, in relation to 5G and IoT and 4IR. I just wanted to know, and maybe you can sort of, you know, tell us a little bit about how many of these papers are sort of, you know, put to practice. What's happening? What are the ground realities? I mean, it's good to have papers, write papers, but what's happening?
At least I can vouch for Europe. I mean, these papers really work. They do help, you know. For example, these days, earlier research used to happen, you know, in an isolated environment, for example. Research happens, project given, project closed. Nothing saw the light of the commercial grade. Now, for many, many years, now we say standard-based research. If your research does not see the light of the day, which means commercially, which means it needs to have a linkages with patents, essential patents. So if I take a practice, I think there are very good linkages when it is standard, when it is policy, when it is implementations, follow-up. If you see you pick up any slide in EU, it has a sequence, you know, one paper release, and then the follow-up happens, and the assessment happens, then where we stand, do we need to upgrade that? So there is a continuity. Now, it's not that it is not happening in India, it does happen, but the pace is slow. Awareness around standardization is very low in our country. We only understand standards when it is mandated, but actually standards should not be mandated, it should be voluntarily implemented. But in India, nobody understands, nobody knows about it. But once it is mandated, everybody goes back to the department or the ministries. No, you can't do this. It's an additional cost. It's a certification. It's happening, but it's slow in India. But I think with digitization, digital India, smart cities, all these new initiatives that the new government has put forward, there is a follow-up. There is a close follow-up. So I think we are catching up what we missed out. For example, there was no TSDSI. I started with this project. We worked with Ministry of Communication to set up this organization as an independent organization, member-driven organization. Because initially they were thinking, oh, we'll create one of our department to be a standard setting organization. I said, it doesn't work like that. I mean, these standards are developed by industry. It has to be an independent. You could be a member of it. You could contribute to it. You could ask standard setting organization to develop. It happened. But they also need to catch up. I mean, look at the ITSE, how many years of existence they had it. So TSDSI has to catch it up. So it's happening, but it's slow. But I think India is also on track.
Right. So thank you, Enrico, also for waiting for us. So Enrico, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Wonderful. So Enrico, you have referred to the commission paper of 2017, and of course you have co-authored another paper which was presented at the European Parliament in 2019. How do you see and where do you see Europe is heading so far as to bring about some transparency? Because when you were presenting, you stressed a lot of, you know, on the word transparency in this era. How do you see transparency happening?
Yeah, I think the Commission is really keen on that, on the need of transparency because of the lack of transparency so far. So what I see in the near future is, as I said, a greater cooperation between SS, Standard Setting Organization, and patent offices, especially the European Patent Office. For example, providing links two patent office databases, EPO and national patent offices in Europe, is crucial. It's crucial to stress, to highlight the visibility and exposure of SCPs in various IoT sectors. So what should be secured and what might be secured in the near future are, for example, formal agreements between standard setting organizations and patent office to guarantee that the links to this information are efficiently managed, are smooth, they are accessible by implementers, and also these databases should give specific information on who is the current owner of the patent, for example, as a consequence of a transfer of rights, the status of the patents, including the breadth of the claims that have been amended or reduced, for example, as a consequence of an opposition at the European Patent Office. This is important because it clarifies the overall breadth of the SCP of the standard essential patent, and therefore the implementer's potential exposure. So an implementer should know in advance very clearly whether his products are going and product bring SCP, right?
Okay, thank you. So I think we have sort of just about enough
Hello.
time to
Lost you.
have a few questions. Enrico, yeah, okay, yes. So few
Yes.
questions, yeah, Claudia. No.
So I guess the first question is to Enrico. Where do you get us from that there's a presumption of essentiality? Because this has never been the case, it's still not the case. I mean, you have a presumption of a patent that has been granted, but when a company comes to you and says they have essential patents, they have to show it to you. That's the way we do it in both sides, because we also take licenses and we don't care what someone says. We want it to be seen a claim chart. They have to show us why that patent is essential, otherwise we will not pay for sure. And then on the issue of transparency, we have seen it in Avanci, a platform that is showing how much they have to pay, an independent expert looking at essentiality checks, a fee which is clear, quite low. Still you have plenty of people not willing to pay. So I think that alone this transparency is not going to be sufficient. You need to have a balance in the patent system itself. And by saying a balance, I mean in both sides. It has to be incentive enough to get both parties negotiating, because these are the ones having the experience. In the IoT, I agree with you. We need to have modems which are more transparent. That's why Avanci was created. But then we need to have players also giving information for us to address what front is. So this transparency, I would like to advocate more also from the other side, to share what is the value they are getting from the connectivity, to make sure that the patent holder is making a front offer. And then the final remark is on the definitions. I know it will be very easy to have one, but then you risk that you will not cover all the situations. That's why we don't have a definition so far, because we need to be flexible in this regard. Now with IoT it's a little bit particular, because most of the cases is one-sided license. A fridge manufacturer doesn't have essential patents so far. And those are situations where instead of maybe having a definition, we can have a royalty published and that everybody knows, okay, my competitors are also paying this. So I would like to hear also your input on these remarks. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your comments. Yes, on the latest, on the last point, flexibility when it comes to assessing FRAN, I think this is, of course, this is appropriate. And also communication by the Commission has stressed the need to be flexible by saying, okay, when it comes to assess the brand, we need to adopt a like this approach. We cannot say what is brand is the general rule of friend. We need to go on a case by case basis. We need to refuse a one size fits all solution. This is quite sensible and appropriate. As I said, that is stressed.
Enrico,
in
you're breaking all the time, but maybe I would be very interested to continue the conversation with you. Maybe the organizers can share our email address and then we can connect separately. You're
Absolutely.
breaking, it would be a pity. I'm interested to get your answer.
Absolutely. I will be happy.
Okay, Claudia, second question, one you could repeat it and whether it is addressed to me or him because
Yeah, I just wanted to get your input on the issue of transparency from both
From
of
the
you.
pan-
From
from
the
the
three
panel.
of you. You are all familiar with this topic, so I'm interested from your perspectives in the issue of transparency from both sides and whether instead of having a definition, maybe in IoT might be more useful to have public statements on the royalties rather than a definition of something which needs to be flexible.
completely support transparency. As I said in my presentation, a disclosure is the best place you should disclose it. You just disclose it, it helps, even the implementer, you know. Today when we talk about 1M2M common service layer, a lot of questions pop up. Is there an IPR? I mean, yes, we just go to the database and pull it out, information, and give it to them. Now, whether that IPR is really essential patent or not, that's between two parties. They can discuss, you know, among the parties. We fully support the transparency.
Okay, I mean, I mean, I don't have any problem with this entire issue of essentiality and the transparency checks on essentiality. I mean, the fact of the matter is, one of the factors in the entire process involving essentiality and, you know, counter checking whether actually the declared patents which are essential actually do happen to be essential or not. I think probably in one of the slides, it was mentioned in one of the panelists that, you know,
just a clarification to stop, sorry to interrupt you, but the declarations are never about essentiality. They are about potential essentiality.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact of the matter is that, you know, they say that when the essentiality check is actually conducted later on, between 10 to 50% of the patents were found to be actually essential. Now, my point is, my submission is a very humble submission here that, well, if it boils down to, you know, probably the monetary analysis of carrying out a check on essentiality or whether actually those patents are legitimately essential or not, maybe it can be either split between the stakeholders or probably the SSO can also pitch in and say, well, look, it's our process, you are our members, maybe there's some role or some way we can help you. What I feel.
For the negotiation.
Yeah, not.
Only when somebody is not adhering to the agreement, if not going through this mechanism,
of course.
then SSOs could, you know, pitch in and he say, guys, you got to respect that.
Yeah. I mean, because going to the courts for every problem is not the solution. Maybe for some countries it is, but looking at India specifically, that's not the solution. We cannot afford to do that. So it has to happen within the SSO. That's what I feel.
Eric, you had a point.
I question a little bit the value of transparency in this regard. I mean, first, if I use Ericsson example, they claim to have 49,000 patents. Let's say there's 10,000 standard essential patents. It's absolutely unreasonable to expect Ericsson to provide claim charts and to pay a third party to prove that their 10,000 patents are actually essential. Declarations are oftentimes made early, before a patent is even granted, before the standard is finalized. Standards are constantly undergoing revision, updating. So this would have to be done on a periodic basis. The cost that you would put on a licensor would be enormous. And in every licensing discussion I've ever been in, the licensee says your patents are all not essential and all invalid. So even if I had this transparency, it really wouldn't help me in a bilateral licensing negotiation where I have to prove, at least to the satisfaction of the licensee, that I have a a portfolio that's worth a certain amount of money. I do this by proxy. If Ericsson comes banging on your door saying you have to take a license from us with their 10,000 standard essential patents, they'll give you 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 claim charts, but they won't give you 10,000 claim charts. It's unreasonable. Nobody can discuss that in a reasonable amount of time. These things are done by proxy. And I think that this idea that we can have complete transparency and that it really would add any value to the license negotiations, I'm a little bit skeptical about it.
Bo, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical about a lot of things because I always first believe that people are saying things to get something for themselves, not because it means something for the whole system, right? And transparency can be one of those. It can also be, Manvin, what you were talking about, wanting to define FRAND more. What that will mean is that somebody will lobby the SSO to define it in a certain way, just like IEEE. That didn't make things better. It made it worse. So it's better to leave it broad and let the market actors do it. Now, my question to you, almost all the arguments you made to me, I got the sense that you were worried about the implementers, but almost everything you argued was actually something that was important for the SEP holders, because in India there's only implementers, and the fact that nobody can get to the court, that's good for the implementer. Because FRAND without any injunction to worry about means that SCP implementers can just continue to implement. There's nothing blocking implementers from building the market. It's the same argument in the European Commission where they think that, well, we have to solve the SCP issue because we won't build an IoT economy in Europe. Why do they think that? There's absolutely no one saying, I'm not going to roll out products with IoT solutions because of FRAND. Because you don't have to pay. So I'm trying to, where is your argument coming from? Do you think?
It's more of a neutral perspective and not really an implementer-friendly perspective.
Okay,
I may have sounded
so
that
people
way.
should be critical of you here in India. So you're a radical here.
Yeah, I mean, no,
I'm just
no,
curious.
that's fine. I mean, it's just one of those things that when the entire discussion is from one side, and there is an argument from the other side, and that's like a small argument, it seems as if I'm kind of advocating for them, but it's more of a neutral perspective. Okay. Because when I say that both of them have an equal stake in the entire standard setting process, and that's the reality. Let's face it, it's not just a question of the haves and have-nots, it's more of striking a balance between the interests of the patent holders and the implementers. So yes, when I talk about India, we don't have innovators, we have implementers. But at the same time, on a global level, on a global perspective, to a great extent, the fact of the matter is that the balance, to some extent, also has to flow from the SSO IPR policies. It cannot be that you make everything at a you keep everything at a surface level and you let them decide for everything, which is not going to happen. Let's be honest, the problems are arising because there's nobody to interfere. I don't say, by no means do I say that you become the courts. SSOs do not need to assume the responsibility of courts. But maybe some ambiguity in IPR policies be removed and that the burden be shared equally between both the sides.
It would seem that a lot of implementers nowadays, maybe Indian implementers as well, they're not involved in the standard at all. They're a third party to the overall FRAND agreement. That would seem to be difficult for the SSO to enforce something on a third party who's not even associated. I don't know.
And just to add on to it, if you understand these standard setting organizations, they are the platform. At the end of it, standards are developed by the industry. The academias, they work, they come forward, they work on it, they develop standards, they decide on. We are facilitating, we are a facilitator. We are not a decision maker, we are facilitating the process, entire process. So I think, first of all, they should not get into it. Second is, it's not their field, it's not their paradigm. I mean, at the end of it, it is industry who has to decide on it. So we must not get confused that standard setting organization are the competent people who are developing standard. No. They are providing a platform where people come forward from industry, academia, or consumer organizations. They sit together, they develop a standard together. We are a facilitator. And that's why this 27 years, I mean, so many years this policy has worked. and I think it'll continue to work, but discussion will happen. I mean, somebody has to be radical to give the idea. I mean, this idea pop up in IEEE, they implemented, where they are, they went down.
Yeah, the Director General of ETSI in December of last year issued a clarification on ETSI's position on FRAND, and he just reiterated the long-standing position of ETSI that FRAND is a commercial issue that's to be dealt with outside of ETSI, and that we take no position on FRAND, the meaning of FRAND, and he said we do so because we're a neutral platform for the development and production of standards, and it's worked for us in the past, and we're going to continue to do this.
And just to let you know, last 4 days, he was here, Luis was here. We have been discussing and debating in last 2 conferences, discussion around 1M, 2M, IPR related and a FRAND mechanism, because we had to discuss the same thing with the Indian side of it. Indian platform developers who have developed the platform now, they have to interwork with 1M, 2M. So I completely agree. He again redefended the same position even in last 2 days in the conference as well.
So
thank you.
We actually have run out of time, and we are ready for the valedictory session as well. I must say, it was fascinating to hear all the panelists, and future need not be perfect, as we are trying to be perfect. So, so there are challenges, and hopefully we'll resolve the challenges in a much smoother way. Now, on that note, let me again thank the panelists, and if I may now request, a big round of applause would really help. If I may now request Professor Abhirup Bose to do the honors.